This video is at the tail end of a series for the nutrition course that was live last year. So if you've not been to the previous segments, please do so before proceeding because this won't make much sense out of context. You can find the rest of the course at healthsecretssummit.com past events. Now I'm going to be asking you some questions on what we've covered so far, but first, let's wrap up the small intestines. The small intestines are approximately 3 times your height, and in total, food typically takes about 5 or more hours to transit all 3 sections. Along the way, its consistency changes from that baby food chime we talked about to a thin, watery mixture, perfect for your microvilli vacuums to suck up into your bloodstream. Now, in summary, see if you can answer these questions. I'll give you a second or two to answer, then the correct answer will show on screen. Question 1. Where does most of our carbohydrate digestion take place? That's an easy one. Where does protein digestion start? Another easy one. What part of the digestive tract digests fats? Once digested, where do nutrients go to have their fate decided? Remember, the liver is grand central station of the body. What transport vehicle do proteins and carbohydrates use to get to the liver? And where do fats go for processing? Now, if you missed any of these, you can always go back to review. Now, we just talked about the digestive system, of which you see a much better picture here. One final issue. All enzymes are not created equal. There are 2 kinds, plant and animal. Now, plant enzymes work in the stomach. Animal enzymes work in the small intestines. Why is this important to know? Well, if you recall, pancreatic enzymes, the ones that run out, are animal enzymes. They get the signal from the O-ring and start working in the jejunum, remember? Now, animal enzymes, first of all, they can be destroyed by stomach acid if they're not made properly. But secondly, if they make it to the jejunum where they are needed, the pancreas has already done its job. So, if the pancreas needs a rest, if you are trying to heal your pancreas and you need to give it a rest, what kind of enzyme do you want to take? And if your pancreas is shot and not producing enzymes anymore, what kind of enzyme do you want to take? By the way, what's that fat pink thing draping over and around the small intestine? Might as well take a look at it while we're here. Notice where the appendix is. It's a skinny little 4-inch tube right at the entrance to the large intestines on your lower right side. And there's a theory that the appendix acts as a storehouse for good bacteria and is used for rebooting the digestive system after a diarrheal illness. But nobody knows for sure. This is health secret number 8. We're going to spend some time here because this is where several of those puzzle pieces that I mentioned earlier fit in. Many naturopaths and health professionals use this system for where to start when looking for the root cause of a chronic condition. Now, the first place you want to look is fuel. What fuel are you giving your body? And I'm not just talking about what you eat, but also the quantity, the quality, and the source. For instance, you may be eating an apple thinking that you're doing something healthy for your body. But if that apple has been irradiated and is therefore devoid of enzymes, it may not be as healthy as you thought. And this reminds me of my mom. When she was in her 80s, long before I was a natural health professional, she lived to be 99 and a half, God rest her soul. And she had a pretty good diet, except for the fact that she microwaved almost all her food, which is probably why she had arthritis. Arthritis is known as a cooked food disease. But that aside, she called me one day to ask my advice on what to do about her increasing arthritis pain. Apparently, it was getting worse by the day, and this had started very suddenly and had been going on for about 2 weeks. And each day was worse than the last, and nothing she did was helping. And at this point, it was interfering with her lifestyle because she could no longer walk her mile a day. So I said, Mom, what are you eating? What new thing have you added to your diet within the past 2 weeks? She said, nothing. I eat healthy. I'm not eating anything new. She clearly didn't think diet had anything to do with it. So I made the 2.5-hour drive up to visit and see if I could solve the puzzle. Almost as soon as I walked in the door, I noticed the culprit. She had tomatoes on her kitchen windowsill, which she said she started eating about 2 weeks ago. Once I explained nightshades to her, problem solved. Before I left 2 days later, her pain had decreased significantly just by not eating tomatoes. And I explained to her that she didn't have to completely give up the tomatoes she loved. She just shouldn't eat them every day. Same thing happened to my husband, only he did know what nightshades were because he spent a whole weekend fending for himself while I was visiting her. So he knew the whole story. But the difference between the two is his issue was happening at work. So on weekends, his pain decreased. He thought it was stress. And when I asked what he was eating, all he would say is that he just started eating healthy. He just cut out all his candy bars, his tasty cakes, and all that stuff. He even said his body didn't like healthy food. We were joking about it. But long story short, every day he would come home with more and more pain. And every day I would ask what he ate that day. Never a mention of tomatoes. So 3 weeks into this, he came home on a Friday and couldn't make it up the 8 steps to our living room. He literally had to crawl on all fours up the stairs. At that point, I told him that the only way to solve this riddle was for him to fast. Nothing but water to flush out his system for 3 to 4 days. He was in so much pain, he would have agreed to anything. But after about a half a day of drinking plenty of water, I made him some really healthy bone broths, using many of those healthy living tips that I shared with you in the previous script. The concentrates minerals, the collagen, my homemade vegetable water, even my parsley ice cubes. I don't think I told you about that. At the end of the growing season, I harvest my herbs, chop them up, and freeze them in ice cubes to use in cooking. I don't think I mentioned the main ingredient I use in broths either. It's called Better Than Bouillon, and it comes in about 3 or 4 flavors. It's organic, and it's packaged in like a 4-inch jar. I'm telling you, a tablespoon of that in boiling water is really all you need to make a wonderful warm drink on a cold day. But I always add my secret ingredients to beef up the nutrition. I think eventually, for him, I added noodles when he was feeling better and some chicken on the very last day because I knew he wouldn't react to those. Anyway, he was much better within 24 hours, and 4 days later, he was back to normal. So I explained the 4-day rule to him, which is when you have a negative reaction to any food that you have been eating a lot, stop eating it for at least 4 days to give your body time to get used to the fact that it doesn't have to make antibodies anymore. It takes 4 to 5 days for those antibodies to dwindle. Then you may be able to eat it again in moderation, but it's never a good idea to eat any food every single day, no matter how healthy you think it is. The instructions I gave my husband for day 4 was to add one thing back into his diet at a time and to stay away from whatever he was eating during the 3 weeks he was in pain. And he was fine after that. It wasn't until months later that a casual conversation revealed the link to tomatoes. He's an architect, and he'd been working on a building 2 blocks from his office that had a fresh market on the ground floor. So he went there and ate 1 or 2 whole tomatoes for lunch every day. And this is what he considered healthy. He went off sugar and onto tomatoes. I tell you this because people often say that they have a healthy diet, but healthy is a relative term. What is healthy today may not be healthy tomorrow. And tomatoes are not the only food that can cause problems. Lemons, beets, pineapples, almost any food, if eaten to extreme, can cause issues. So you really need to scrutinize what you are eating. And that brings us to the quality of your food. Now, I'm sure you read labels because you don't want to put any harmful chemicals into your body, but just know that the term organic, while better to have on the label than not, only refers to what's not in the food. It does not tell you what is in the food. The healthiest looking produce can be nutrient deficient, and it all depends on how the farmer feeds his crops. In the old days, they would plant cover crops and then plow them under to add balanced minerals back into the soil. Hopefully, organic farmers still do that. But do you? In your backyard garden, are you growing the same crops every year in the same soil? And if you're only using commercial fertilizer, know that most contain only 3 ingredients. That's what that NPK stands for: nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. But almost none of them put trace minerals back into the soil, like crop rotation and cover crops. In the next video, I'm going to show you a mineral wheel so that you get an idea of what trace minerals are and how they relate to each other. But keep in mind, plants are only as nutritious as the soil they grow in. If it's not in the soil, it won't be in the plant. And 3 chemical minerals are not enough to make your food nutritious. Now, if you can't or don't want to rotate your crops or plant cover crops, then make sure you are adding trace minerals back into your soil before you plant, during the growing season, and after harvest. A very good company to investigate is Down to Earth Fertilizers. They sell stuff like humic acid, azomite, which is like a volcanic ash, BioLive, a kind of probiotic for plants, and in addition, I use Epsom salts during fruiting for sweeter, more magnesium-rich produce. Epsom salts has magnesium in it, and magnesium is what makes your produce sweet. You also want to look at the quantity of your food. What percent of your diet is protein? What percent is carbohydrates? What percent is fats? There is a perfect balance, but unfortunately I can't tell you what it is because it's different for each blood type. What I can do is direct you to a book by Dr. Peter J. D'Adamo, and that's spelled D'(Adamo), called Eat Right for Your Type, that explains in detail the ratios that are best for each blood type. So you really need to do a deep dive into the fuel that you're putting into your body when you are experiencing a chronic condition. But let's suppose your diet is perfect. What then? Well, then you look to digestion. And I'm not talking stomach ache here. I'm talking about, is your body absorbing the nutrients from the food that you are eating? And this is where that symptom survey that I mentioned in an earlier script comes into play. 80% of the time, the root cause of your chronic condition is going to be tied to one of these 2. Quite often we find that several of these are affected, especially if the root cause is at the top, because each affects everything below. If you have an issue with your digestion, it may not affect your diet, but it's definitely going to affect your hydration, your elimination, your exercise, and your emotion. Each one of these affects everything below it. Let's say you had an illness as a child. You had a kidney issue or a bowel, lung, or liver issue. Maybe you had mononucleosis or encephalitis. That illness, even though successfully treated with conventional medicine, may have left your body not at peak performance, let's put it that way, unless nutritional steps were taken to rebuild the affected organ or system. Now, at the time you experienced this illness, you were in what is called an acute stage compared to a chronic stage. It's much better to be in an acute stage because it's easier to fix and far less time-consuming. If nutritional steps were not taken to help your body heal totally after the acute phase was addressed with medication, then the body, being extremely adaptable, will compensate for the weaker organ or system. Make sense so far? Basically, it's the same thing that happens when you damage a finger or hand. What do? You use the other fingers or your other hand. Your internal organs and body systems do the same. If the original issue is never properly addressed and the body never gets back up to peak proficiency, then eventually the compensation will become the norm, and that is when it's classified as chronic. The longer you have a chronic condition, the more stress is put on your body to compensate, and the harder it is to reverse it, and the longer it will take to fix. By the way, there's a rule of thumb for how long it takes the body to heal a chronic condition, and the rule is this. Once the initial root cause is addressed, it takes approximately 3 months for the body to begin to heal, and 1 month for each year the body was out of balance. That's assuming there was no permanent physical damage. So if you have a condition that has gradually gotten worse over, say, a 20-year period, do the math and see if you can track it back to a trigger event. Then commit yourself to the time it will take to remedy it. Now, where were we? Oh, hydration. We were saying that several of these may be affected, especially if your root cause is at the top, because each affects everything below. Let's talk hydration. Hydration is essential for cellular communication. If your cells can't communicate, you can't even benefit from energy medicine. Why? Because we are electrical beings, and electricity and energy moves along a water pathway. Take it to extremes, you could die from dehydration, no matter how good your diet or digestion is. And Hydration is definitely tied to elimination. When you are not well hydrated, all 4 systems of elimination become sluggish. You become sluggish. Exercise is out of the question. And speaking of exercise, what system supports the blood and handles 2 to 3 times the volume of the blood? Remember that from a previous script? The lymph. And what moves lymph? Exercise. Here's where things get interesting. Not only does exercise affect everything below it, but it also affects everything above. Exercise cleans out your entire system. It promotes good elimination, it promotes sweating, you drink more, you produce endorphins, which affect your mood and emotions. Let's talk about emotions. Emotions have a major impact on everything above. Let's take it from the top. You've heard people talk about comfort food. You've heard people say, I feel like a pizza. I feel like Chinese tonight. Your emotions have a major impact on not only what you eat, but when you eat. And we've already covered the impact emotion has on digestion in a previous script. You can't eat when you're upset. And what happens if you're really, really afraid? People can have bowel issues. And why do speakers always have water on the podium when they're speaking? Because they're nervous. And when they're nervous, they get dehydrated, they get cotton mouth, they can't speak, their mouth dries out. And you definitely have to be in the mood to exercise. So don't downplay deep-seated emotions. They can have a tremendous impact on your health. And we already covered how to clear a trapped emotion in an earlier part of the script, so I'm not going to rehash it here, except to say that there are other ways as well. If you're interested, you can look up how to change subconscious programming with epigenetics. And I did a Facebook post on this recently called Release Unwanted Emotions. So you can always search Facebook or something like that and find wherever it's listed. But Release Unwanted Emotions on my Facebook page take you right to that article, which basically I've given you a step-by-step procedure on how to release unwanted emotions using epigenetics. I believe I also posted that on my personal Facebook page, but I'm not on Facebook under my real name. I don't like giving my real name to social media. I'm on as Angel AltMed. AltMed stands for Alternative Medicine, and it actually is linked to my nonprofit website, altmedangel.com, which just gives a lot of hard-to-find research on natural cures that work. Anyway, another avenue you can pursue is a book called The Emotion Code by Dr. Bradley Nelson, and he uses magnets and kinesiology. Now, the magnets he uses are not those strong magnets that cost a lot of money. A simple refrigerator magnet will do. And the one story I remember from his book that impressed me was a story about a horse who all of a sudden started urinating all over his stall. He had no bladder control. He was stinking up the whole barn. They brought in the vet. He had no bladder infection, no urinary tract, nothing wrong with his kidneys. The vet said it was psychological. There was nothing they could do. They were cleaning out his stall every 2 hours. They were going to have to put him down. But Dr. Nelson happened to be a neighbor, and they knew he worked with psychological disorders on people. So they called him in to work on this horse. And I guess within an hour or so, he solved the issue. The horse was totally cured. Now, all 3 of these methods work, but the first one I gave you in one of the previous scripts is more preventative in nature. The other 2 are more for after you already have a deep-seated emotion, how do you get rid of it? The bottom line is this: if you are successfully following a protocol and everything is going great until it's not, and you literally hit a wall and nothing you do is working anymore, look to trapped emotions as the root cause. A trapped emotion can totally clog a healthy system, no matter how nutritious your food is or what else you may be doing right. It's a wet blanket overlay, a Trojan horse that insidiously blocks your road to wellness. Clearing them may be the key to unclogging whatever ails you and paving the way to your good health. And that's where energy medicine comes in. If you can't do it yourself, seek someone who can. Look for an energy healer in your area who can help you over this hurdle. We'll be doing a webinar on that at some point. Now, I'm going to stop here because I don't want to overload you with too much information at once. The next video goes in a completely different direction, and I prefer you be fresh when you view it. So digest this first, no pun intended, and I'll see you on the flip side.